a mic kind of right over there behind the stage. So if you do have a question for any of the panels, if you wouldn't mind just queuing up and saying your question into the mic, we would appreciate it. Thank you. All right, next up, we have a panel. So writing builds relationships, and no relationship is more crucial than between a writer and an editor. On our next panel, The Circular Relationship, award-winning science fiction, horror, and fantasy editor and anthologist Ellen Datlow, we'll welcome her up, is going to welcome several writers she has worked with to discuss this symbiotic and often mysterious relationship. We'd like to welcome Stephen Graham Jones, author of My Heart is a Chainsaw and the forthcoming Don't Fear the Reaper. John Langan, author of The Fisherman. We have Seanan McGuire joining us virtually, author of there she is, author of Seasonal Fears. Paul Tremblay, author of The Pallbearers Club. And welcoming back Bracken MacLeod, author of Closing Cost. And I just want to make a quick note. We've had some requests for Closing Costs. We are selling Closing Costs in paperback, which is going to come out in just a couple weeks. We're going to be pre-selling that in our bookshop, and Bracken has signed book plates so that you can purchase signed copies, and we will send them to you with free shipping if you'd like to purchase Bracken books. So please welcome our panel.
Oh, yeah. I just did that in the novel, actually.
You ready to go?
Sure enough.
Okay, hold on. Got to get my cough drop ready. Hi there. So the panel, you know what it's about. It's about our relationships. First, I want to say, for some people who aren't aware, although from the last panel you probably know some of it, what an editor, there are different kinds of editors. The acquiring editor, the person who buys the story or the novel. I call it substantive, but it's also, I guess, developmental editor, who also line edits. And that's both working with structure, working with the author on rewrites, revisions, and then the final thing, the line editor, is someone who actually goes over usually it's the same person as the substantive editor, and we go over the story or the novel line by line for final things to make sure we didn't miss anything. And that's different from the copy editor who cleans things up that we all missed, okay? What I want to ask everybody is, what do you want from your editor? No, seriously, and I'm going to ask Seanan, would you like to take that question first? What do you want from an editor, your ideal?
Well, I feel like Sinistar here. They did not tell me I was going to be this big. It's a little distressing. I wish I had cleaned my room. Apart from that, what I really want from an editor is clarity, accountability, and responsiveness. I want you to tell me very clearly what you want. If do what you said you wanted, I want you to acknowledge that you told me the wrong thing, or that you didn't understand that what you wanted would look like. I ask you a question. If I ask you for help, if I say I'm stuck on something, if I say I need you to edit me, I want you to respond to me. Not instantly, but if you say I can get back to you within 3 days, I want to hear from you within 3 days, because you are both facilitator and the blockade to my getting my work done.
Okay. Bracken?
I mean, yeah, it's
not on.
Yeah, I don't think it's on. Whoa,
that one's on.
Yeah. Now it's on. Now it's on. Yeah, no, I mean, Seanan has a good point. What I want is to, you know, it's a real collaboration. You know, is for if there's any place where the story could be better, to hear that, right? And I've had stories that I've sold to publications, and the editor is just like, oh no, this is great, and nothing, and it just kind of feels. I mean, it's nice to be in the book, and I'm confident in my work, but I genuinely feel that everyone needs an editor, and I'm interested in other people's perspectives, because by the time I'm finished with a story, I'm so close to it that I can't see its warts. Right, I'm just like right up on the surface, and so yeah, having any kind of like creative back and forth is the best part of being edited for me.
I just want to add something about when you're saying that you are too close to it, you don't see things. None of us see things. I mean, I was mentioning that in a story I published, The Atlas of Hell by Nathan Ballingrud, my mother found a typo in the finished book That means no one else, and the first page, no one else did. He didn't, I didn't, my editor, my in-house editor didn't, the copy, no one caught it until my mom did, which is like, so
Thanks,
we're all
Mom.
blind.
That's what moms are for.
I know. Anyway, Paul.
What I want, what I really, really, really want, sorry.
From an editor, no one else.
All right.
You can show yourself out.
Yeah, so from the novel perspective, because that's mainly what I've been doing, the last decade. First, like with the publishing house, your editor has to be your champion against the sales team. And I'm not saying that like lightly. My editor, Jennifer Burrell at William Moore, I've been super lucky to be with her since, she picked up A Head Full of Ghosts in 2014. And there's some like seemingly bad requests from sales, whether it could be, usually around the title of the book or something like that. So for me, first and foremost, they need to protect me from the salespeople, and probably them from me as well. But on the editing side of things, very similar to what Bracken and Seanan just said. The thing that really clicks with Jen and I is that she's a no bullshit person. Sorry, am I not allowed to swear here?
I've been swearing
Okay.
all goddamn day.
But at the same time, like, it's not authoritative, heavy-handed. Like, if something really bothers her, she'll just, like, Socratic method of editing, she'll, like, ask me questions until I answer them and I can see, oh, yeah, there's something that doesn't work here. She'll also, I prefer when she does actually mark up the manuscript and I can see stuff like that. The conversation stuff's harder. Yeah, she hasn't done that she didn't do that for the last book, which I really actually sort of missed. It was more conversational, which actually for me made it a little bit harder to sort of wrestle the book. But yeah, I think all of us, honesty, and give us a chance to think of whatever edit they pose to you in a new way. And I give myself, the last thing I'll say is, I give myself a 24-hour rule for any criticism or edit that I get. I can't respond to it for 24 hours. Because the first 24 hours, I'm whining, pounding in a corner, like, why don't they understand me? And then maybe it's because I've subconsciously trained my brain this way. By the next day, I'm much more rational, and I can see it objectively, and I would trust myself much more to be, I think what I have works and what they say doesn't work, or it's usually some sort of compromise.
The first thing I want from an editor is to be invited to their anthology. When I start, I'm talking about like short fiction. When I first started writing, I would see on whatever the social media was at the time, probably telegraphs, I would say, read it. This just in, Ellen Datlow has new anthology. Stephen Graham Jones invited, Paul Tremblay invited. I was not invited, right? Stop. So my initial thing when I started writing was I want to get invitations to those anthologies, and it was a case of be careful what you wish for. Now, and what I want is a relationship ultimately with the editor. I want to be able to have a sort of back and forth. I want to be able to give them a story, and then have them respond to it and not rewrite the story for me. But just say, look, I don't think this is working. The second story I ever sold to the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, Gordon Van Gelder took it, and then he wrote back to me, he said, there's something wrong with the ending. It doesn't work. And I rewrote the ending like 3 times. And finally he was like, okay, that's good. And he never told me it should be different. What he did tell me was, oh man, this reminds me of when, I was working with Stephen King on a story not that long ago, and he had to rewrite the ending 3 times. And that was like the right thing to say to the writer, oh yeah, me and Steve King, So I think that I sometimes think that editors have to play this additional role beyond what you think of in terms of story structure, language, that sort of stuff. They have to kind of know the insecure writer and be able to say the things. So Ellen sometimes, if I submit a story to her, will write back and say, yeah, I'm taking the story. Here are the edits that I have, or the questions or the suggestions. And at the end, she'll say, or sometimes at the beginning, sometimes at the beginning and the end, but it's a really good story. I really like it. And I'm like, oh.
I always have to remember to say that because I know writers are really sensitive.
Why? Because it's a lie? What are you saying, Ellen? You brought me up here in front of all these people to humiliate me?
The people who I buy stories from a lot and edit a lot, I usually just get right into it, and I have to remember, they're still writers, they're still little flowers, and I have to remind them that I love their story, or I wouldn't be working on it. Basically, hopefully you all know that I wouldn't bother even dealing with the story if I didn't care about it, because I don't have the time to deal with stories I don't like.
Yeah, no, you're
But
absolutely.
I still do mention that.
You know, but I appreciate it anyway. I appreciate it's like getting flowers for the little flower anyway.
Because you're a delicate instrument of art.
I'm a delicate fucking flower. Okay, let's just keep that in mind.
Yeah, that 24-hour rule is a really good rule. It'll keep you out of a lot of hot water, for sure. And you know, what I want is just a good editor. And what a good editor is to me is someone who reads your work, your piece, whatever you've given them, and they identify or register what it is you're trying to do, and they crawl inside the story and try to push it out here and pull it in there to try to make it better do what it's trying to do, while also navigating the space between the text and the reader. Because the things that I think are wonderful, like somebody might look across the room and touch their knee, and I'm like, I can't believe that actually happened, but that doesn't matter to everybody else. That matters to me, you know? And the editor will tell me that. I say, what are you doing here? This is stupid. And I don't mind an editor telling me something stupid. And so I can adjust it so that it can actually, the feeling that I want to get across to the reader can maybe get across to the reader a little bit. And you know, and like John, I like an editor not to tell me, he needs to wear a blue blazer on this page. I'll need them to tell me. I like them to tell me, have him wear something, you know. But I don't like particular suggestions. I like identifications of broken parts, and then I can come in and fix it as it needs to be fixed, possibly. And I may have to do that 6 times. I may put the wrong color blazer on this dude 6 times in a row, but I'll finally get there. But if the editor tells me, put him in a plaid blazer, then he's never wearing a plaid blazer, you know?
Just on
Unless
principle.
it's important to the character. Yeah, I mean, as an editor, I feel my job is to work with authors to make their stories sing, or better than they are, or at least whatever. Yeah, I mean, okay. I mean, I ask questions. That's mostly how I edit. I'll say, why? Sometimes I'll say, I don't understand what's happening, what's going on. And then the author, I don't even use the phone anymore. I guess it must be by email, because I hate talking on the phone. I said, tell me what's going on. And then they will tell me what's going on in their head. And sometimes, well, it's not on the page. Please put it on the page, because no one is going to understand what the heck you're talking about. And one thing I did that was totally unconscious is like with The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle, all I said to him, and it was just like a reaction, it's like, well, that's awfully abrupt, the ending. And he wrote a new ending. And I didn't ask him to, it just felt abrupt to me. And that's when he actually had Tom survive, which initially, it was just like, he dropped, you know, it was, and it was totally unconscious or subconscious. It was not, I was not asking for something. And so I guess a lot of editing is instinctual for me. I don't know. Should I ask about bad editing experiences? No, seriously. I mean, you don't have to name names, but, you know, what, was it you, Paul, who said that or Bracken, the editor is between you and the publisher? And as an anthologist, I run interference between my in-house editor and my writers. And sometimes you have bad relationships that way. I have had bad relationships with my editors, even though they're not supposed to top edit. In other words, they're not supposed to re-edit what I've already edited. But I'm sure we've all had experiences, and would you like to talk about them a little bit? Sean, and when did you start, if you don't mind?
So I, for the most part, have had pretty good luck with editors, but I went to an editor, I took a book to an editor, and thankfully for me, at least it seemed like thankfully at the time, the editor accepted the book, which is always what you want as an author, is for an editor to be excited about a book. And then that editor said, okay, it's a great premise, I like your narrator, I would like it more if there was more than one of them. I would like you to revise this book to have multiple points of view. And like a very silly person who honestly wanted to see the book published, I said, sure. So I read the book in roughly half the time that had been allotted to me for a rewrite, to go from having one POV to the 4 that this editor had requested. And it broke the book. It completely shattered what had been intended as a cozy apocalypse, because a cozy apocalypse really kind of depends on that tight POV. You know, I Am Legend, weird as it is to say, is a cozy apocalypse because your protagonist, who is not living a cozy life, has literally no way of knowing what's going on. Literally no way of knowing where the vampires have come from, if the rest of the world has fallen, and that's what keeps your scope narrow. Well, once I went to all of these points of view, that broadened and the book changed into something that didn't work for me. So I went to this editor months ahead of when they were supposed to have possession of a draft and said, it's broken. This book no longer functions, it no longer holds together. I never asked for anything, and Ellen can testify to this. I am fairly chill. I will ask my questions, go away and do my work. I never asked for anything, but I need you to edit me now. Will you please help me? I literally said please repeatedly. And this editor said, oh, sure, boo, I got you. I'll fix it. I'll help you. And then never said another word. We wound up pulling that book from the publisher. It has not been published to this date because what I came up with from doing what the editor asked for was unpublishable. It would have done me material damage in addition to breaking a book that I felt very strongly personally about. And I don't have faith in that editor anymore. Like, I don't enjoy working with them. I don't go out of my way to work with them. I will not voluntarily work with them because the one time I actually asked for help using my words, they said I would get it, and then I didn't.
I'm going to start from this end. Oh, unless you want to.
No, go, yes.
Stephen.
Bad editing experience, or what makes a bad editor? To me, what makes a bad editor, and I've experienced this as well, is any editor who changes anything in my text without telling me about it. That puts me on the defensive, and for the rest of that editing process, even if it's just like, maybe I want to spell fetid, not F-E-T-I-D, but F-O-E-T-I-D, you know? And that could be stupid for this story, but, you know, make a little note in the margin and say, this is stupid. Don't change it because you think I messed up. You know, that just really turns me off to an editing process. And in the same fashion, any editor who tries to stuff a semicolon in my mouth, I spit it back out and try to spit it on them if I can. Yeah. I'm not aligned against semicolons. I think semicolons are wonderful and elegant and beautiful, and they can expand things so well. But the world doesn't use semicolons properly, I'm convinced. And I guess what I'm saying is I think I do, and I'm probably wrong about that as well. But anyways, I've broken up with a publisher before because in a final book, they put a semicolon in there that's not my semicolon. And so I feel like I always have that semicolon rattling around in my mouth now for the rest of my life, and it's so weird. I do not like that even a little bit.
I'll have to be more careful. Because I actually, when someone's copy editing after the other processes, I actually don't pay as much attention to the punctuation changes sometimes, so someone may have changed their things to semicolons. I'm not sure. But actually with Stephen, I've asked you, sometimes his language is, I don't know if it's slang, but it's regional. And so some things don't hit me right. And initially, I thought they were wrong. And then I asked, it's like, well, is this intentional? And then so I know now to ask him if there's an unusual use of a turn of a phrase. I need to make sure it's intentional or not. And once in a while, it hasn't been. It's been a typo. But that's important to ask again and not just do it.
But you've taught me also, like, I always, like the place in the house, the room in the house that you keep the washer and dryer in, if you have a room for that, I always call it the utility. And Ellen, you've told me before, what do you mean? And I realize that it's a regional thing because people in other parts of the country say utility room. They don't say the utility. And so I will change it to utility room because I don't want my book just to be for people from West Texas, you know?
Well, I feel bad now because what if more people do know that? I guess we should take a poll. Who knows that utility is utility room? Raise your hands. Aha, so I was right.
I've never heard either, actually.
I don't
It's the
understand
washer.
this conversation, yeah.
Laundry room.
Well, the way with the laundry room, yeah.
Yeah, okay, anyway, John.
Do you need to go to the utility room, John?
It's entirely possible I do, yeah. I feel like I've been very lucky. Editing experiences, you know, it's the 24-hour thing, right, that we're talking about. There may be moments where you get something back and you're just like, Why don't they understand my genius? And my wife is like, stop. But I feel I've been very fortunate in terms of the editors that I've worked with when it comes to stuff that's been published. I did have one experience where I had an editor just completely misapprehend what I was doing and say, you know, I need you to sort of throw out about 2/3 of the story. And I could see that the editor had a certain vision for what a story is supposed to be. And I was not writing that kind of story. And I did, I wrote to the editor and said, look, I'm just going to pull the story. And it was not a prima donna thing. It was just, you know, I said, you're the editor. You have a right to have the kind of anthology you want. And I can't make these changes. So, and then the editor said, no, I want to have you in my book. And I was like, okay, but I can just imagine that editor was like, that guy's a jerk, which fair enough. I did with my second novel, The Fisherman, behind the scenes, I did have an editor who wanted to take the book for a reasonably large press, but wanted me to completely rewrite it. And I was so desperate to be published that I was like, sure, anything. And fortunately, the deal fell through, and the book, you know, went to a smaller press, but with its kind of integrity intact. So, but those are minor complaints. I think other people have gotten screwed in ways that make me shiver and make me feel very sad.
You know, I went to a smaller press and then won the Stoker, so you got the last word, man, the last laugh.
The funny thing is when it won that award, I was, was like thrilled, and my wife went online and she was like, to all those people, ha, ha, ha. And I was like, honey, okay, but you know.
I was like, John, Fiona's sending me emails. Tell her to stop. So I have three. I'll try to be really quick. Different stages of my writing life. The first one was my first novel that I sold to Henry Holt in 2007, Little Sleep. And you know, my assumption then, like as definitely a very relatively new writer, was like, ooh, the rest of my writing life is now, there's this carpet out there for me. Because I sold the book to a major press. My editor was very cool, but unfortunately she left like 4 months after, you know, she acquired the book. And for new writers, not to terrify you, but if your acquiring editor leaves at a big house, the best thing that can happen to you is indifference. It's usually death, honestly, because whoever takes you over is going to be a very competent editor. And the woman that took over, like in terms of story, was super competent and very good. You know, she made the books better, but she wasn't personally invested in it. You know, she wasn't. And she certainly wasn't empowered to go, to go fight the sales and fight for what was right. You know, the deal was originally a hardcover deal, and like, you know what? You know, we're just going to print it as paperback, so you'll never earn out royalties. So that's one, which is out of my control. The worst line editing note I got from the same book, and it was from the first editor. At the end of a chapter of The Little Sleep, she wrote, "This ending's too literary. You know, it needs to be more a page-turner thriller." And I was just really bothered by like using literary as a pejorative in that sense. And the last one, which I did want to talk about briefly, is broadly, it seems from all the younger writers and newer writers that I talk to, it seems more and more that agents want to be your first editor. And if you, the writer, want that, that's great. Uh-oh, I got cut off.
Quickly, the agents are in
The agents are in the audience. But honestly, that trend bothers me a little bit. It worries me a little bit. Because I think, agents are wonderful and they're going to be your champion, but there's still like their goal is to sell the book. And I kind of feel like it's going to be hard for a lot of agents to overcome the idea of what's best for the story. How am I going to make this more saleable?
Many agents came from book publishing and were editors first. Just to
Yeah, but
mention
not
that.
all. No. Yeah, certainly not all. So anyway, I say all that. I've been with my agent. I've been very lucky. He and I have been together since 2006, which is very rare to have an agent that long. Summer of, this will be quick, I promise. This is the last one. Summer of 2013. This is the third one, asshole. Third.
If he could do math, he would have gone to med school.
Agent.
It's funny because he's a math teacher.
I was going to make a joke about your integrity, and I missed the opportunity. Anyway, my agent thought I was working on something different. He wasn't a horror guy. And he said, hey, how's that novel coming? I'm like, well, I have 100 pages of this thing that's an exorcist possession story called A Head Full of Ghosts. And I sent him the first 100 pages, and the commentary he gave me was terrible. In his defense, he wasn't a horror guy, and also he hadn't read the whole book, so he didn't know what it might be. And I can totally see just reading 100 pages and like making some sort of judgment on it. Like his main thing was like, oh yeah, should this be first person? It should be third. And it really threw me for a loop. Like for a week, I was depressed and I thought I would give up on the book, but I somehow decided that, I'm just gonna write it, and if he doesn't want to do it, then I'll get a new agent. Like, I had to feel that strongly enough about the book. And to Stephen's credit, and I've told the story before in public, so he won't be mad. To his credit, when he read the whole book, he was like, I've never been so happy to send an email that I was wrong, this is great, etc. So all of that is like, part of that was my fault, was just springing 100 pages of something on him. I don't think it's ever a good idea if you're writing a novel just to send like 100 pages and ask for editorial direction for one thing. So I think that's on me. But the other part that makes me a little bit worried, as I said, is the agent being your first editor. I don't know if sometimes, I've heard many a story where that doesn't work out so well.
Well, so I can comment directly to that. My agent likes to edit and give advice, and for the most part, his advice is really, really good. But he had one note on closing costs, which I mentioned in the prior panel, which is my two main characters, and his comment was, "Why are these people such assholes?" And what he didn't realize is that I had based them on me and my wife. And so I was like, you might just need to come to dinner. I think that was generational because he's much older than I am, and I don't think he got the way that Gen Xers talk to each other, and that sort of that gentle ribbing and insult humor is the way we express affection often. But that missed him. When it got to my editor, she keyed into it right away because we're from the exact same generation, and I think that's how she talks to her peers too. And so, the four most important letters in any writer's life are S-T-E-T, STET. And it means, no, that's what I intended, leave it as it is. Right? And I think that standing up for your work is something valuable. Like, everybody needs an editor, and it is a collaborative process, but at the same time, not everybody gets it entirely, and it's a matter of interpretation and perspective, but ultimately it's your work. And it reminds me of something. Daniel Kraus just posted this letter that he got from Peter Straub, who we just lost. Who, if you haven't read Peter Straub, you need to fix that right away. But Peter wrote to Daniel, "My greatest regrets have to do with my responses twice to publishers and editors who simply failed to see what I could do with my novels in progress. Imagining I was intending to write books they had pretty much worked out in their minds, they expressed appalled, disbelieving shock when confronted with what I was actually doing. Wow," I said, "that's really too bad, but sure, I'm willing to cooperate," and both times wound up lost, depressed, and pissed off. Never again. And so Peter's talking about standing up for the integrity of your art, and it's art, it's expression, and not every comment that gets made on your work is going to be an absolute fix. Some of it can be discarded, and that's the trick. Like the Rosetta Stone of being published is knowing what advice to take and what advice to jettison.
Yeah, I'll give an example that I've told a few people, and I won't use names or anything. Terry Windling and I edited an anthology after, young adult anthology. It was a post-apocalyptic and dystopian stories. And it was bought for a lot of money by I can't remember, I think it was Harper. I don't remember the publisher, actually. And the publisher was the one who bought it, okay? The publisher gave it to a senior editor to be the editor. Now, generally, when you do an anthology, the in-house editor does not edit your work because that's what your job is, that's what you're paid for, okay? So a senior editor got the assignment. We handed in the book. That person left. It was given to a junior editor who had not worked on anthologies, who I do not believe read science fiction much. And basically, she tried to do a top edit on every story. She tried to re-edit every story that we had in the book, including saying, well, this is too long, this needs to be cut, this shouldn't be part of the book, this one needs to be out completely. And Terry and I, who between us had about, 50, maybe at least 50 years of editing between us, we went to our agent, and said, this is, we cannot believe this editorial letter. We have not gotten anything like this ever. And we want to pull the book. If they're going to not back down, we're pulling the book. We'll pay back the part of the advance we got. And our agent went and basically read them the Riot Act, probably back to the publisher. I have no idea what she said to them, and they backed down. the editor, we had 3 queries after the whole 5 pages of editing notes. We got 3 queries back and we answered them. The thing is, the book was never taken from that editor, which means they were, I don't know how they felt about it. I assume they were humiliated and pissed. And I can't believe that they fought for the book, and it didn't do well, it didn't sell. And so, even professional editors who work with publishers, we have our own issues back and forth sometimes, I don't know if you want to discuss anything else, or we can take questions. Should we oh, please, go ahead.
And I just want to say one more thing, I don't know, which is sort of at right angles to this, which is that editors are often, for me, these actually a really great source of ideas. Someone will write to me, an editor will write to me and say, I'm putting together an anthology of stories about, I don't know, were-sharks. And I always write back, okay, well, let me see what I can do, And I'm thinking to myself, were-sharks, what the, But then the little hornets in my brain are just like, okay, we know this idea is ridiculous, but they sort of get around the planning table, and they're like, well, how would we put together a were-shark story? And so I feel like a lot of stories that maybe I wouldn't have written have come about because of almost like the sort of writing prompt that I get from the editor, and I've sort of discovered stories that they're my stories, right? But I might not have come to them, or I might not have come to them as quickly or in the same way without Ellen saying, hey, this anthology is called Supernatural Noir. What are you going to do for that?
I've never asked for a were-shark story. Seanan, would you like
I would write for the Were-Sharks anthology.
Okay. Okay.
Sharknado, fantastic.
Would you do it?
We are not doing a Were-Sharknado anthology. That series of movies is where the Sci-Fi Channel lost its integrity.
Okay. Are there questions? Is there someone getting up at all? Would anyone like to ask a question?
Get on up. Or answer.
I mean, while you're walking to the microphone, don't all rush. Okay, there's plenty of room. I will mention that, that sometimes an editor, apart from their relationship with you as a writer, has a relationship with the material itself and can be a real champion for your work. In this instance, my experience has been Closing Costs came out, it was bought by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt and published by them, but it streeted about 2 weeks after Houghton Mifflin was sold to, the trade edition, the fiction division was sold to HarperCollins. And, and so HarperCollins is now putting out this book that has HMH on the spine, right? And I'm just in the red column, and I lost my marketing team. My agent, or my editor formerly at Houghton Mifflin, now at HarperCollins, they moved her to a subdivision, which is William Morrow, and she fiercely fought to take my book with her, which I'm eternally grateful for, because I don't know what would have happened if my book had been what we call orphaned and I was left without an editor. So the paperback is coming out in like 10 days from William Morrow. But without her being an advocate for it and really believing in it, it could have been a situation where they just dumped the paperback entirely, and the hardcover is the only edition that they're not going to support because they didn't do the print run. So, sometimes editors are sort of your book warrior. Right, they're the first line of defense. As Paul mentioned earlier, against marketing, who might want to change your title to something stupid, or just sort of against, the sales team that's like, oh no, it didn't do the figures we wanted it to do because COVID happened and we sold the division and all of that.
I had an anthology, Little Deaths, that was commissioned by a British publisher, and subsequently, I pitched another one to them, a Revenge and Vengeance anthology, and I don't even remember what the title. I wanted to call it a dish served cold, or Vengeance Is, or something like that. But instead, they insisted, the publisher, who was Anthony Cheatham at the time, who was the head of the publishing company and a real big name, he instead decided to call it Lethal Kisses to make it go with Little Deaths, kind of. It was not, and implied it was sexual and sexy, and it was not at all. And I've been fighting for that ever since. And at one point, Ashtree actually put it out as an ebook, and and they did use, I think Vengeance is, I don't know, but then they went under, and Open Road got it, and they're doing an ebook, but back to Lethal Kisses. I can't get away from it. So, but people who think it's about, it's sexy and erotic, it's not. It's vengeance and revenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I had a book. The editor picked the title, and it was called Stranded, which it's punchy. It's a single word, it's memorable, but the problem is that there's a billion books called Stranded. So when that book came out, if you just searched up Stranded, you got all of Jeff Probst's tie-in novels for Survivor reality show. Nice. And my book was like the third page in on Amazon. So yeah, no, an editor picking the title or a marketer picking the title is not always the best thing for you.
But now I see like a whole vengeance is a dish best served sexy. Come on, come on.
And it had a picture, it had a woman, her back, sorry, I can't do both. Her hands are behind her back and she has holding a knife, sexy from 80s sex, 60s, it wasn't even contemporary.
I spit on your grave poster,
Kind of, yeah, and yeah, it was just oh no, please don't do that.
I spit on your grave sexily.
So,
I can't even see back there. I mean, I'm sorry, my eyes are
there's a handsome, distinguished gentleman at the mic right now.
Okay,
So I like, Mr. MacLeod, what you were saying about how an editor helped you. And I know it sort of goes back a little bit to the first question, but I would like to know sort of what good experiences have you had with editors? Mr. Tremblay, does Jen help you out with, how does she help you out with sales? Those, that's my question there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sorry. No, I mean, almost just about all the experiences I've had with Jen have been positive. I mean, she saved my career. So I'm going to try to give some specific examples, but with A Head Full of Ghosts, because I was given a second chance, which, not many people get after your first 2 books don't do well in big publishing. It's really hard to get another book deal after that. It took 5 years. But anyway, they first came back and they wanted to change the title to have possession in the title or something. And she really stood by me and said, no, that's a bad idea. We're not going to do that. And that was definitely when things were most precarious for me with, Jen and William Morrow. I'll often send her, so I don't send her partials, but I'll often send her an outline of the book. Sometimes they require it. If I'm off book deal, we have a good enough relationship that hey, we only need 30, 50 pages and a summary to make another offer, if we like the book. So she and I often talk about books before they're even close to being a book. And she really helped me with The Cabin at the End of the World, just in early discussions. When I first thought of it, it's I think I'm gonna have all the invaders be men and have it be a story of what the violence that men do. And she was like, that's dumb. You should have some women too. Oh, you're right. It was a very simple conversation like that. And that title changed, and I think that was obviously the right call. But no, I mean, with Jen, I've been very lucky that all my positive experience has been with them, and the negative ones were with the first go-round.
Seanan?
I have had some great editor experiences. Frequently, the thing I run into, and Ellen has experienced this with me, is I will go into my own head. I know exactly what I'm trying to say. I understand fully what that word means or what that metaphor is meant to construct to. And I have relocated to Ponyland for the duration of writing this story. No one who is not exactly me can comprehend it. And that's not saying because I'm so smart, that's saying because I wrote it in Ponylandese. Ellen is very, very good at looking at my nonsense and going, I don't think you meant to say what this says to other people. I worked with Dong Wan Song at Orbit for my first trilogy as Mira Grant, and Dong Wan looked at the world I had set up and very unerringly pointed out some things that seemed perfectly logical to me because of the way the science worked and the society fit together. It was this is problematic and you should change it. And I have to listen when editors tell me something is problematic because they don't want me to get yelled at and they don't want to get yelled at themselves. And that is my goal, is just not to get yelled at.
A writer has to make a decision no matter what stage they're in and what stage their material is in. Do I think that this person's advice is going to enhance the book, or is it going to screw it up, or the story? And that's where you have to be fierce and stand up for what you truly, truly believe. But if you're wrong, you need to be, hopefully you'll be persuaded to fix the issue.
You know, talking about particular positive experiences, when I gave My Heart is a Chainsaw to Joe Monti at Saga, it was initially just a standalone novel, and at the end of it, it was Hamlet at the end. Everybody was dead on the floor. It was like I'd drawn a picture with an etch-a-sketch, and I just shook it, so everybody was wiped out, And Joe said, I like it up until the end. He said, but you kill everybody. And I said, yeah, it's a slasher. What do you expect? And he said, that's going to break people's hearts. And I said, yeah, that's what I'm going for. But he didn't ever tell me not to do it, but he told me that he didn't think it was working. And so, I hemmed and hawed for 2 or 3 weeks thinking, how did I get into this situation? This book is going to be ruined. But then just on a lark, I opened up a side file and thought, I'm just going to try to do what he says and let 2 or 3 people live and see what happens, And sure enough, it came together. And so now My Heart is a Chainsaw is going to be a trilogy, and I just finished book 3 on Thursday night. So.
You better treat Jade well. You better not hurt her really much worse than she better, let's put it this way, she'd better survive the 3rd novel. I'll be really pissed off.
I think
Wait, did you all answer?
I think so.
No, what?
I did experience it, but
Good experiences?
I've had no good experiences, but no, most of my experiences have been great. And every now and again, as I said, man, this sounds so self-satisfied, and I apologize, but Ellen reprinted one of my stories in the Year's Best, and she writes an introduction, sort of a survey of this past, this is what happened in horror this past year. And in there, she singled me, and I think it was maybe Caitlin Kiernan now, and said, the 2 of them have been doing really good work this past year, and I really just want to recognize that. Obviously, I still remember that. That was like 10 years ago, maybe 9.
You must have had a lot of good stories out that year.
It's entirely, but it's still nice to hear someone say it. You know what I mean? Like you think, well, I'm getting published and blah blah blah, but yeah, you're insecure and so yeah, that's the kind of thing that really it does. It lives in your memory, and it kind of helps you when you're having those long dark night of the soul or whatever. You think, oh, but remember that. That's not BS because she put that in writing. It's not just something she said to me in an email.
Did you see the face you just made?
She's like, they seen through my
Email
lies.
is a paper trail. I'm sorry. It's the same.
I guess it
Always
is.
say-
But, yeah.
Whatever. Bracken, you do?
Well, I mean, there's not much I can add that they haven't already mentioned. I've been very fortunate and had really great experiences with almost every editor I've worked with, and my bad experiences have been sort of minor. I did a non-edit of a story that I get back, and they didn't catch any of the typos or whatever, and I had to re-edit my own story. But my best experience with an editor has been one of sort of collaboration. It was Closing Costs, and my editor Jamie Levine. She felt like I hadn't put the characters in enough danger. Like I was being too kind to them, and I'm sure that part of that psychologically was that, like I said, the book is set in my own basement. My wife and I are the models for the characters, and I hadn't gone where I needed to go to give the book the kind of emotional punch that it needed, and she recognized that, and she said, they need to go through a lot more than they do in order for this to hit as hard as a Bracken MacLeod book hits. And the really fortunate thing is that she's not just my editor, she's a fan of my work. She's read all my other books, even though she didn't edit them. And so she knows what my voice is, and she recognized when I had failed to live up to the promise that my prior work had made. So that's my best editorial experience.
Stephen, briefly, I'm a little disappointed you didn't say your highlight was when John and I edited you for Creatures. Stephen turned in a story that was all 1 paragraph. And we're like, Stephen, it's all 1 paragraph. He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, cool. We'll publish it.
How many pages was it?
Oh, probably 4. Yeah, it wasn't many. But I guess a secret code is anytime I do those no paragraph stories, which I do a lot, that's because I forgot to write this story. And so I'm writing it in the last 12 minutes I have, and I don't have time to put paragraph breaks in it.
So you need to ask, is that intentional?
Hi, I've been writing short stories as well as editing anthologies and learning as I go. For those of you who do both roles, does it inform the other role that you do? What do you learn from the opposite side?
So I was like a slush reader for like an online magazine, and this is the first decade of the 2000s, the second half, so 2005 through 2009. I did some slush reading for an online magazine, a print magazine, and co-edited 3 anthologies. And for me as a writer, especially that first time reading slush, that really informed my writing, because you're gonna spend your entire life learning like what's the best stuff to do. And for me, that was the only way I was going to learn what not to do, was by reading all these stories that failed. And I could pinpoint why they failed, like whether it was the first paragraph or later in the story. So to me, I found that a tremendously, as a writer, helpful experience.
Say something. Okay. I think one of the most difficult things to do is be a writer/editor. I am not a writer at all. And what I caution people who do both is when you're acting as an editor, you have to be really careful not to impose your voice on the authors, on the work you're working on. I mean, I have heard where, I was told once that a writer was really difficult to work with, and it turned out they were not. But what had happened is that a writer/editor had tried to rewrite their story once. So that can happen, and I think someone who does both has to just be really careful.
I mean, and that could be, I mean, so this story is that I saw exactly that happen in real time, where there was an editor who wanted to be an up-and-coming editor and had gotten a bunch of people and together and had published a couple of anthologies, but he continually did this thing where he would add lines to a person's story without letting them know. And it's just absolutely, and it's absolutely you cannot do that, right? You are not the writer, you're the editor. But then he did it to the wrong person. He got a New York Times best-selling writer, who I won't name, to give him a story, because the guy was just generous and he wanted to help up-and-coming people, and he knew that his name on the cover would help this guy, and the guy put in like 3 or 4 sentences that writer did not write, and he was so furious, he used his platform to point out that this is not how the business works. And he didn't say, don't buy this book, don't do anything. He just said, don't ever do that. And that guy never edited another book. As a matter of fact, he's completely out of publishing entirely. I mean, it can be career killing if you let those two slightly overlapping Venn circles become a single round circle.
When I was an editorial assistant in book publishing many, many years ago, I was working for a very small publisher, an imprint called Charterhouse. They had commissioned Final Stage, an anthology edited by Ed Furman and I think Barry Molesberg, I'm not sure. And I hadn't read it at the time, but I was working for the publisher when Harlan Ellison, who came for his copy in the office. And I was like, oh my God, I'm such a fan. It's like, yeah. But anyway, I gave him the copy, he went away. And it's a good thing he did not look at it when he was at the office, because subsequently he exploded.
Because Harlan was so well known to be even-tempered and...
Yeah. Right. Because apparently, my boss, my editor boss, apparently, now I don't know what she did. I don't know what changes she edited all the stories, but I do not know what she actually did to them. I don't know if they were minor things. I mean, Harlan hated any kind of change.
Well, Harlan knew it.
But apparently some other people complained. I mean, the book, when it was reprinted as a paperback, was totally, all the edits were taken out. And, I mean, she was now this was a mainstream publisher. So maybe, and I don't know if she had edited an anthology, the in-house editor. But yeah, you don't do that.
Did she survive that?
Huh?
Did she survive that and continue?
Yeah, but the publishing house didn't. Not because of that, but I was laid off like 3 months later. I mean, the place went
unrelated.
Out of business. Well, actually, I became an editorial. That's a long story. I worked for a different division for a while. Yeah, so do not do that.
One thing that I think doesn't come up as often, because we don't really super like to think about it, is that especially when you are a wee baby author, we've heard stories about New York Times bestsellers doing damage, about Harlan Ellison doing damage, whatever. When you're a tiny wee baby author, the power is 100% on the editor's side. And so you do have to maintain not just a level of professionalism, but a level of universal civility and sometimes universal humility that can be really difficult. I had one editor who shall not be named, different editor than the first one that I was complaining about, who I turned everything in, turned it all in on time. We have the paper trail to prove it, and he didn't do his edits for 6 months. When that meant the book was in danger of being pushed and there was no longer time for me to do the structural edits he eventually asked for and make our original pub date, he went to his boss and told them, oh, no, she didn't do it. She didn't give me the material. I couldn't be editing her. She was being a prima donna and not turning things in. Again, my agent and I had the paper trail. We have the timestamps. He was in the building. He's the one who was believed. And I no longer published with that specific publisher because that editor created such a firm idea that I was difficult to work with. But I'm not actually that hard to work with.
I've never found you hard to work with.
I love you too, Ellen.
Yeah, no, I think Sean's point is a perfect one. Is that people want to work with people whose work they admire and who they know can produce a story that's valuable and will engage readers. But they also want to work with people that they enjoy working with. And so the best advice I can give to anybody who wants to be in this business is be kind. Right? Because on the other side of the editorial table is another human being, and people want to work with people they know they can get along with and will listen to them and not be abusive or cruel. And so, yeah, be kind.
Yeah, it's like Ozzy says, be nice to the people you meet on the way up because you're going to see them on the way down.
Yeah.
Right. And on that note, I think we're done. Thank you so much. This is Sean. Well,